Formulaic. The term has become a synonym for derivative, stock, boring, but perhaps that's unfair. Perhaps that couldn't be further from the truth. In studying our greatest stories, it becomes hard to ignore that well-tested formulas are the foundation of nearly every great narrative. For me, this realization began with a seed, planted by an obscure work from a rather uncelebrated classicist. To understand the role of formulas within everything from The Lord of the Rings to Star Wars, we must go back to the origins of complex narratives, back before the world was literate. Orally composed stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Odyssey needed to be formulaic and repetitive. Having no written copy to refer to, performers required repeating epithets, descriptive phrases with a set number of syllables such as bright-eyed Athena or the wine-dark sea, to maintain the poetic meter, the rhythm, but also simply to make the memorization and performance of these 12 to 16 hour texts possible. This extended beyond specific phrasings though. Story beats, lines of dialogue, character archetypes, and even the overall narrative structure were brought to heel under formula's leash. But far from harming the pieces, classicist G.S. Kirk suggested the greatest of them were the ones who leaned in to these formulas. Kirk provides two primary advantages for formulaic composition. We'll label these the iterative advantage and the associative advantage. The iterative advantage provides the composer with a well-tested foundation, a stable position to experiment from and iterate on. When formulas come into popular usage, it is because they were demonstrated as successful, and with each subsequent usage, that formula is concentrated. Its superfluous elements are boiled away, the core becoming ever more potent with each use. With the oral poetic tradition, this was more direct. Each retelling of the Odyssey would differ, each rhapsode by necessity recalling the most impactful and meaningful formulaic elements and cementing them over time. At the end of this process is an untouchable formula, one which has been almost scientifically engineered through hundreds of performances, tweaked to maximize audience engagement. The cunning composer can take that formula and build upon it, iterating upon the proven by testing the waters with a new idea, all without risking the whole enterprise collapsing. It allowed for a measured, steady progression of the medium. Reform without the risk of revolution. The associative advantage, meanwhile, uses what many claim as failings of the formulaic narrative, namely predictability and familiarity. The process of creating the formula over numerous stories requires audiences as test subjects. They see the progression firsthand and are liable to become fatigued at seeing it repeated. But the artful author weaves the formula in more subtly. Its recognizable traits obscured by novel additions, its familiar features concealed beneath flavorful tones. All the while that formulaic pulse beats beneath the surface, speaking to the subconscious and taking advantage of prior exposure. Each previous story utilizing that formula left their mark on the audience. Emotionally, philosophically, logically, spiritually, etc. So when that formula is used in a new piece, it revives those thoughts and feelings. The new narrative becoming, quote, thick with echoes of other contexts, other heroines, other actions in other islands, under the impulse of other but still familiar gods. The new story is vivified with the spirits of its predecessors, effortlessly taking on all the associated nuance and complexity of its forebearers, all without the need for anything other than simple familiarity and formula. Kirk attributes these advantages explicitly to the oral tradition, but after reading these a question lingered in my mind. Does this apply to other mediums, to film, theatre and literature? I knew exactly where I needed to go to find the answer. Many storytelling formulas have been developed, utilized and ultimately analyzed throughout our history. Todorov's equilibrium theory, for instance, which suggests that all narratives follow a progression from equilibrium to disruption before returning to a new equilibrium. The hero's journey, one of the oldest and most widely adopted formulas which sees a youth called to adventure, guided by a wise older mentor, crossing a threshold, etc., all on their way to self-realization and maturity. The list of formulas is long. But here I'd like to cover the core of it all, the elements which make a narrative great regardless of detail, the essential formula. For that, we need to go back to ancient Greece. Aristotle's Poetics explored narrative like never before. Applying his philosophical methods and materialistic thought process, Aristotle created what was essentially the origin of literary theory in the Western world. While Plato dipped a toe into the field during works like the Republic, it was aimed more so to understand the value of literature and narrative to the society at large. Aristotle, on the other hand, wanted to dissect the narrative and uncover the mechanisms beneath it. Analysing the most prevalent medium of his day, the tragedy, Aristotle discovered a series of rules, a literary law, a formula, which all great works followed. These can be broken down into 4 key commandments. Commandment 1. A narrative must be representative of a whole. In the Republic, Plato famously argued that poets should be banned from the perfect society because their work was a poor imitation of reality, a copy of a copy, distorting the truth. Aristotle, however, saw this as the greatest strength of the narrative. Storytelling is, at its core, imitation. However, its ability to condense the endless possibilities of the world into a coherent whole is what makes each story so potent. Man craves unity. We label, we create multi-step processes, we establish universal laws, all to reduce the scope, that we might see it all at a glance. This is reflected in our stories which, according to Aristotle, must fulfill our desire of unity. A great narrative, quote, should have for its subject a single action, whole and complete, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It will thus resemble a living organism in all its unity and produce the pleasure proper to it. But Aristotle warns of confusing unity of topic with unity of action. He uses the Homeric epics as his example. The Iliad, for instance, while depicting events during the Trojan War, knows that the decade-long conflict was too broad a focus. The campaign's events were not unified in action, but rather a collection of episodes. Likewise, a man's lifetime is a series of episodes. We move through epochs, phases, sometimes overlapping or related and sometimes not. And it is only after that we can put these moments into complete sections. And so, Homer chose not to depict the moments of the Trojan War which did not support the core action of his narrative. The abduction of Helen, the landings, the Trojan horse are all absent because they do not represent a narrative whole, a single action. Instead, the Iliad concerns itself with a short period within the war, centered around a thematic through line, the rage of Achilles. Beginning with Agamemnon's wounding of Achilles' pride, exploring the cost of that wounding on their comrades, and eventually arriving at a moment of reversal in which Achilles abandons his rage in respect for his enemy's grief. However, this unity sometimes requires expanding upon. The example given in the Poetics being epics, tales such as the Odyssey and the Iliad, which by their sheer length need to explore many episodes, many actions across a broad range of time. But the truly great narrative never abandons that commandment of unity. Rather, they interweave the two to bolster each other. Aristotle refers to these as the unravelling and the complication. The unravelling being the core action, such as Odysseus returning home, and the complication being an episode which forces the plot to veer off slightly as the characters are performing their unified action. In great works, the unravelling and the complication need to support each other. The complication cannot be a pointless filler event. The Lord of the Rings can be a great example of this formula. Tolkien's trilogy contains a broad series of events and characters, challenge upon challenge, battles and adventures galore, and yet the core unravelling is never forgotten. The unified action is the destruction of the ring, and most episodes tie into that whole. Whether it be an epic battle between fielded armies, confrontations with monsters, or debates over how to navigate a mountain, the complications serve to enhance the core mission. to add further stakes and tension to reveal more of this world that we may see the potential consequences should Frodo and Sam fail. Just how important narrative unity can be is demonstrated even more so in the film adaptations of Tolkien's work. Contrast The Lord of the Rings with its focused unravelling and complementary complications against the Hobbit trilogy, spread thin like butter over too much bread as it loses its core action in the third film's opening. Tolkien knew the core of The Hobbit was the confrontation with Smaug. It was a traditional tale of confronting the dragon, and hence the Battle of the Five Armies was kept brief. The film, however, drags out the battle over a 3-hour epic. It weaves in a lengthy depiction of the return of Sauron, follows Legolas on his battles with orcs, tries to tie in a dwarf-elf love story, etc. Unrelated complications which serve only to pad out the length and distract from the unified action of the narrative, and the product is far inferior as a result. Plot unity is one of Aristotle's key ingredients to a great narrative, perhaps the most essential formulaic element. It distinguishes the narrative and literature from historical accounts and arrives at more impactful revelations on man as a result, which brings us neatly into our next commandment. Commandment 2. Universality above particularity. The Poetics stresses a distinction between the narrative and the historical work, not to undermine the historical work, but to celebrate a unique element of the great narrative's formula, which many overlook: universality. History focuses on particularities, on events and figures, dates and locations which result from long, unbroken chains of cause and effect. If you've ever studied history, you'll be well aware of this. Analyse any one event and you can trace innumerable influences and causes. The fall of Rome, for instance. Countless theories have been suggested, from moral degradation to the debasement of the currency, mass immigration, the reliance on mercenary forces, and even widespread lead poisoning. The problem with the material world is its complexity. We desperately try to find historical trends and laws, categorizing periods of time into ages and epochs, but it never quite fits squarely. There's always a counter-theory, always more to uncover, another unconsidered detail. The very process of converting history into a written account necessitates the mimetic failings which Plato described in the Republic. Plato uses the analogy of the bed to present mimesis. He argued that in our world there is the ideal, the pure idea which represents an abstract concept, the very concept of a bed, a place of rest to sleep in. When the idea is expressed materially, it loses much of its potential. The materials used, the dimensions, the type of bedding, etc., all narrow down that initial broad concept into a tangible thing. Then comes the artistic depiction of the material object. The painting, the sculpture, the literary description. They further remove the object from the initial idea as it loses functionality as well as possibility. Now, Plato saw this as a negative, a reason why poets should be expelled from the perfect society. But Aristotle sees it in a different light. Aristotle sees this condensing as part of the formula for a great narrative. Instead of representing what did happen, which could be a random series of complex, unrelated and unlikely events, the story plays with what can happen. It narrows the idea into something comprehensible, subtracts the complexities and dead ends of the material, and arrives at a core universal truth. The plot and characters can be crafted towards the same aim, revealing some moral or logical truth which underpins events in general, rather than in a single example. It takes inspiration from many events, finding that universal through line, which lies at the heart of each of them, and displays it for the education of the audience. Prime examples for this will be found in many of the biblical stories. Cain and Abel, for instance. In this tale, Abel makes a superior sacrifice to God and is praised for it. Meanwhile, Cain's inferior sacrifice is looked down upon. Rather than accepting responsibility or even accepting the rejection with grace, Cain allows his jealousy and his spite to get the better of him. He blames God and takes his rage out on his brother. The particularities of this tale are irrelevant. The location is unimportant, the period not required. The universality is the backbone. We have all felt ourselves turned to spite. We have all acted out of anger or a sense of undeserved misfortune. We have all lashed out at those who were not responsible and failed to take our own failings upon our shoulders. By focusing on the universal, by diluting the series of events and not attempting to create a true reflection of all the complexities of events within our world, the narrative touches us all. It speaks to the core of our humanity. That is why it is an essential component of the formula for great narratives. But unity and universality can rapidly become unwieldy, if not tempered by Aristotle's next commandment. Commandment 3. Probability and necessity. So far, we've covered ways in which the narrative transcends the real, creating impact by making something unified and more universal than reality. But there is a vital formulaic element which allows for this. Aristotle suggests that the best narratives contain plot points which follow, quote, the law of probability or necessity. When we deconstruct the world into abstract concepts, it is possible to get lost in the abstraction, but a solid grounding in reasonable progression is essential to maintaining immersion. Think of all the times you've been enveloped by a story, lost in the pages of a novel or the frames of a film. When something happens, a character performs some action which is completely illogical or which goes against their established behaviour. Some serendipitous event occurs, a deus ex machina materialises from nowhere to resolve a conflict. Characters make choices without consequence. However it manifests, the illusion is broken. Suddenly, it becomes all too clear that this is fiction, false. Narratives walk a thin line to maintain the illusion of reality. Events must transpire in probable sequences even more so than reality in order to keep the audience immersed. Each plot point must progress towards the unified goal at believable steps, each event occurring as a necessary result of a previous one. Cause and effect are constants in our lives. From switching on a light to earning a degree, we are ever acting to bring some effect into reality. So prevalent is cause and effect in our lives that its absence in narrative is instantly noticed. The truly great narrative, however, goes above and beyond. They utilise cause and effect, probability and necessity, not only to plan out a narrative and give events realistic progression, but to enhance the piece as a whole. By demonstrating that cause and effect are very real in the narrative, you elevate tension. Any mistake, any misstep, could have dire consequences. When events follow probable progressions, the outcomes can be teased, leaving the audience in suspense as they await what they know is coming. When plot points cause complications, it forces the audience to pay attention. Any event could escalate, building cause upon effect as the situation becomes ever more complex, requiring diligence to follow the trail and keep each piece of the puzzle in mind. A strong reminder of the necessity of this commandment came through the sharp decline of the Game of Thrones television adaptation. The initial seasons weaved complex yet probable chains of cause and effect. Each and every character, no matter how central to the plot, could quickly perish by a simple mistake. The audience was seized with anticipation over what would happen next. What established character flaws would cause a fall? How would these political webs unfold over each season? How would the events impact the other characters and the world at large? Then came the final season. Established character traits were thrown aside for convenience and spectacle. Consequences for actions were unpredictable, sometimes being overblown and other times completely neglected and forgotten. Reasonable battle strategies were abandoned to get an interesting shot of cavalry disappearing into the darkness. All this to say, when you abandon the probable, when cause and effect are applied at varying degrees and consequences cease to feel necessary, you alienate the audience. You can throw out as many plot twists as you like to attempt to bring a sense of shock value, but it will never land because it felt unearned. Which brings me to the final formulaic element. Commandment 4. Recognition and reversal. This can be seen more as the victory lap, the cherry on top. In the Poetics, Aristotle separated tragedies into two categories, the simple and the complex. with recognition and reversal serving as a way to distinguish that complexity. Recognition he defines simply as, quote, a change from ignorance to knowledge, and this can manifest in many ways. A character can become aware of some great threat, be inspired to take a new approach to a problem, realise something about themselves or others, etc. It can serve to create an emotional impact on the audience, to elicit empathy or excitement. It can spark soul-searching sessions or inspire courage in the face of the unknown. Once again, it reflects something universal. Man is curious by nature. We constantly seek answers, constantly test new ways of engaging with the world. Ever the student and never the master, ever striving to grow. Once again, the formula taps into something deeply human, reflecting our nature back at us and promoting mimetic learning in the process. Reversal, on the other hand, plays with irony and expectation to make its mark. It utilises surprise to engage the audience and enrich the narrative. A character may expect one outcome but is faced with another. The audience can either be kept in the dark alongside the character and experience that moment of reversal alongside them, or we may be shown that reversal before the character, what we would refer to as dramatic irony. Aristotle stresses, however, that the prior commandment regarding necessity and probability should not be forgotten. It is one thing to lead the audience down one probable road before revealing another. It's something else entirely to switch from probable to impossible. The logic must still be coherent. The greatest of these complex narratives, Aristotle suggests, utilises both the recognition and the reversal at the same time. The example given in the Poetics is that of Oedipus the king. Oedipus is given a prophecy in his youth that he would marry his mother and kill his father. To escape this, he abandons his home and heads to Thebes. Little did he know, he was running from his adoptive parents, right into his fate. Along the road he encounters an arrogant king who he kills in an altercation. Arriving in Thebes, he saves the city from the Sphinx and is married to the queen as a reward. Years later, this all culminates in a moment of both reversal and recognition when Oedipus's investigations into the prior king's death revealed not only his own guilt in the crime, but his identity as the child of the Theban royals. His attempt to run from his fate led him straight into it, a reversal of outcome. His constant striving for the truth, even when warned against it, leads him down a road of recognition after recognition. The narrative unfolding piece by agonizing piece as the audience grits their teeth awaiting for that final moment of recognition and reversal. A more contemporary example, which likewise takes on the familial theme, would be the famous reveal in The Empire Strikes Back. Unlike with Oedipus, the audience and Luke are aligned in knowledge. The narrative cleverly sets up false expectations by calling on three formulaic tropes: good versus evil, the hero's brave charge to save his friends, and, after we're told Vader killed Anakin, the classic revenge story. As an audience experienced with these narrative beats, we expect these setups to play out as they often do, but the reality strikes both Luke and the audience simultaneously when we get the reversal via recognition. Vader confesses his identity. Luke loses the battle. Not only does the hero fail and the villain succeed, but the hero is forever tarnished by being the child of the villain. There is a reason this moment is one of cinema's most referenced scenes. It follows all four of Aristotle's commandments. It uses the two characters as representatives of the conflict between the rebellion and the empire, the reckless but passionate versus the measured and experienced. The two characters represent the unity of action not just of The Empire Strikes Back, but of the whole original trilogy. It appeals to universality by mirroring all the times we charged into a situation recklessly and paid the price. It engages with probability and necessity by allowing the battle to progress as it would be expected to. Many lesser narratives would give the plucky hero the chance to conquer the villain, but Empire hits us with the reality of the situation. This is a seasoned warrior, an expert duelist and a master of his craft against a novice barely capable enough to use basic force abilities, and the narrative is not afraid to show the probable outcome of this. And finally, we get the recognition and the reversal. Aristotle's formula is everywhere, every medium, every genre. Many of the greatest narratives are built upon its foundations, and each of them are made all the more potent because of it. These formulaic components tap into something far deeper than many of us realise. They mirror our psychology, imitate our world, grant us all we seek and find lacking. They work behind the scenes, a hidden engine driving the narrative into our subconscious minds and allowing for the level of immersion we crave. The formula is what grants this power. So perhaps we should think twice before throwing formulaic as an insult. Maybe it's the reason our greatest stories endure.